Welcome to the Special Education District of Lake County's Social Emotional Learning Data Collection presentation. This presentation will take approximately 10 minutes. For the 2010-2011 school year, CEDAL began implementing positive behavior supports as our social emotional learning core in our sector classrooms. CEDAL Public Therapeutic Day schools are using positive behavior systems with character education as their core. CEDAL also rolled out a series of Tier 2 interventions for social workers and psychologists to use CEDAL-wide. Along with these new initiatives, the Social Emotional Curriculum Committee chose a data collection tool for screening, diagnostic, progress monitoring, and outcome accountability analysis. The tool is called the Strengths and Difficulties Questionnaire, or SDQ. It is a brief behavioral screening normed in the United States for students ages 3 through 17. The SDQ asks about 25 attributes, some positive and others negative. These 25 items are divided between 5 scales. The scales correlate with national statistical data on the incidence of mental illness in children from the National Institute of Mental Health, and also with local norms from CEDAL. The forms and scoring are available online for free. Downloadable in 71 languages, the SDQ is statistically and clinically viable for use in screening, clinical assessment, epidemiology, research, and evaluating outcomes in a pre-test post-test model. The scores of the English version correlate well with those of the considerably longer Achenbach Child Behavior Checklist. The long-term plan is to use the SDQ to its fullest capacity, instead of using different tools for different purposes. A comprehensive assessment plan takes 4 areas into account, namely screening, diagnostic, progress monitoring, and outcome accountability. The 2010-2011 school year is Phase 1 of the rollout of the Strengths and Difficulties Questionnaire. We will be using the SDQ in the areas of screening, diagnostics, and outcome accountability. In the fall of 2010, CEDAL educational teams completed the 25-item SDQ for every CEDAL student. The social worker or psychologist entered the ratings into the online scoring program and then printed out the student's report. For fall of 2010, CEDAL had 100% reporting from Sidlash Academy, John Powers Center, Gages Lake School, Sector Programs, Sally Potter School, and Transition. CEDAL staff, especially the teachers, social workers, and psychologists, are congratulated on this fantastic rate of response. The scores from the SDQ website are grouped into 4 bands. In the general population, roughly 80% of young people score close to average, 10% score slightly raised, 5% score high, and 5% score very high. Each student had an SDQ report printed out that showed how their strengths and difficulties were rated by their educational team. These results included both raw scores and the band level categories of close to average, slightly high, high, or very high. Social workers and psychologists could then plot a whole classroom's results on a classroom counseling plan. This form gives a visual image of the strengths and difficulties for a class of students and can help a therapist determine which Tier 2 and 3 interventions might be appropriate for a specific classroom of students. It can also be helpful to view the overall severity of the needs of students in a specific classroom. The SDQ requires very limited identifying information and requests that users do not use student full names. Thus, the SDQ does not house data either. A Google document was created to house student data for further analysis. A link page was sent to all social workers and psychologists and also put into their email client. Once basic identifying information was entered, social workers and psychologists then entered the student scores from the 5 areas and the overall score. For the sake of analyzing data into 3 tiers for data collection and intervention, the Social Emotional Curriculum Committee decided to use the close to average category for Tier 1, which includes scores below the 80th percentile. The slightly raised and high categories are considered Tier 2, including scores between the 80th and 94th percentile. Tier 3 is the very high category and includes scores at or above the 95th percentile. These data were used to analyze CEDAL-wide social-emotional functioning for the fall of 2010. 31% of CEDAL students were rated in the very high range, indicating that their behavior was scored in the 95th percentile or above compared to a national sampling of same-age students. 35% of CEDAL students were rated in the slightly raised or high range, indicating their behavior was scored in the 80th to 94th percentile. 33% of CEDAL students were rated in the close to average range, or below the 80th percentile. When looking at the pattern of the strengths and difficulties the students are currently experiencing, a therapist can get an idea of what the needs are in a classroom. Here you see a profile of one CEDAL classroom. Most of the students in this high school class have a primary disability of emotional disorder. The social worker for this particular class chose not to take a conduct disorder type approach to this class, but chose instead to form a small group and teach pro-social behaviors with the Waxman Social Skills Curriculum for Adolescents. On this graph, we see the profiles of the CEDAL programs, including Sidlash Academy, Gages Lake School, John Powers Center, Sally Potter School, and sector programs. Notice the difference between John Powers, which primarily houses elementary-age students with eligibilities of deafness, with Gages Lake and Potter, which primarily houses elementary-age students with eligibilities of emotional disability. On this final graph, we see the profiles of the various CEDAL disciplines. These include deaf hard of hearing, early childhood, emotional disability, educational life skills, language and social skills opportunities, learning opportunities, and transition. The second part of the 2010 rollout includes the potential to use the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire as a diagnostic assessment. Social workers and psychologists can use the printed out reports as data for individual problem solving. Again, the scores are grouped into 4 bands so that in the general population, roughly 80% of young people score close to average, 10% score slightly raised, 5% score high, and 5% score very high. Diagnostically, this information can be used for total problems and also for emotional symptoms, conduct problems, hyperactivity and attention, peer relationship problems, and prosocial behavior. CEDAL is working on creating Z-score tables for each of the norm groups so that therapists would be able to report the actual percentile score for each of the 5 areas. This is a work in progress, but this slide shows what such a norms table looks like for the females 4 to 7 years of age. Say that a 6-year-old girl earned a raw score of 7 in emotional symptoms. With the SDQ printout, a therapist could say that she was in the very high range in emotional symptoms, or above the 95th percentile. With these additional Z-score tables, a therapist would be able to pinpoint the exact percentile, to say that she was in the 99.94th percentile in emotional symptoms when compared to other girls her age. The third and final use of the SDQ in the 2010 rollout is in the area of outcome accountability. This category pertains to district-wide and large group analysis and planning for student improvement. For this component, all educational teams will complete an additional Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire in May 2011 on all students. Social workers and/or psychologists will take responsibility for scoring them and entering the scores into the Google document using the same link that they used in September. In June 2011, this data will be analyzed in a pre-test post-test model to determine growth. Data can be combined to look at growth in individual classes, in programs, in disciplines, in age groups or grades, or other categories. We can also analyze rates of improvement to compare groups to each other. For instance, we can compare classes that were located in a PBIS school with classes that were not located in a PBIS school. We can look at classrooms that implemented PBS with fidelity versus those who did not get their systems running to its fullest capacity. We will look at classrooms that used one of the new Tier 2 intervention tools versus those that did not use a new Tier 2 intervention tool. Looking at these rates of progress will help us determine what is working well and what might need to be changed. We can develop some staff development plans, and we can try to replicate the successes that our CEDAL educational teams are having with our students. In the big picture, the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire is good science to be used for several purposes, but is not going to improve our students' lives on its own. The very end of every report states, "If you think this report has missed the point, whether by exaggerating or underestimating the difficulties, you may be right." A brief questionnaire obviously isn't the same as an individual assessment by an expert. Perhaps both are needed. Thank you for helping to provide exceptional services for our exceptional students.